Most people assume that physical intimacy naturally creates emotional closeness, but when it comes to avoidant men, the story inside the brain is often very different. Their emotional wiring does not respond to intimacy in the same way many people expect. Understanding this difference can completely change how you view the relationship. One of the biggest mistakes many women make is believing that becoming more emotionally open, sharing vulnerable feelings, or creating deeper physical intimacy will automatically encourage an avoidant man to lower his guard. From her perspective, every intimate experience strengthens the relationship because her brain is releasing hormones that promote trust, comfort, and attachment. She walks away feeling emotionally closer than before. His experience, however, can be completely different. Inside an avoidant man's nervous system, chronic emotional stress often interferes with the very chemicals that normally encourage bonding. While she is experiencing growing attachment, his brain may still be operating in a defensive state. It is almost as if both people are participating in the same moment, while their brains are interpreting it through entirely different emotional systems. This is why incredible chemistry in the bedroom does not always translate into greater emotional availability afterward. Many women expect intimacy to become the turning point where he finally begins opening his heart. Instead, they are shocked when he becomes distant, quieter, or emotionally unavailable shortly afterward. The reason is not always a lack of attraction. For many avoidant men, intimacy mainly activates reward pathways associated with pleasure and excitement. The experience feels enjoyable, satisfying, and meaningful in the moment, but it does not automatically create the lasting emotional attachment their partner hopes for. It resembles enjoying a favorite meal. The experience is pleasurable, but pleasure by itself does not create deep emotional dependence. Welcome to Avoidanza. In this discussion, we are exploring why traditional bonding often fails with avoidant men, which biological process plays a much greater role in creating emotional attachment for them, and how understanding this difference can completely reshape the way intimacy influences your relationship. The first thing to understand is that the common model of bonding simply does not operate the same way for many avoidant men. Most people are familiar with oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, because it increases feelings of closeness, safety, and emotional connection. During affectionate moments, many women experience a significant release of this hormone, making them feel deeply connected to their partner. But for an avoidant man whose nervous system remains highly alert, elevated stress can interfere with those same bonding effects. Imagine trying to embrace someone who is wrapped in several heavy layers of clothing. Your arms are reaching for them, but something is preventing the full connection. That is a useful way to picture what happens inside the avoidant brain. The emotional signals are present, yet internal defenses reduce how fully they are experienced. This is something many avoidant men never explain, because they often do not fully recognize it themselves. When the nervous system spends years expecting disappointment, criticism, rejection, or emotional pressure, it becomes skilled at protecting itself. Even positive experiences can be filtered through that protective system. As a result, affectionate gestures, comforting conversations, and closeness after intimacy may not produce the emotional response their partner expects. Over time, a familiar pattern begins to appear. A woman feels that the relationship has reached a new level after an especially meaningful, intimate experience. She believes they are finally becoming emotionally closer and starts imagining greater commitment. Yet within days, the avoidant man begins creating distance again. He communicates less, withdraws emotionally, or seeks more personal space, leaving her wondering what changed. From her perspective, nothing makes sense. From his perspective, the emotional bond she experienced never developed in quite the same way. The pleasure was genuine, but it functioned primarily as a reward rather than as lasting attachment. Dopamine creates excitement, anticipation, and satisfaction. It encourages people to repeat enjoyable experiences, but by itself, it does not necessarily build deep emotional security. That brings us to another biological process that receives far less attention, but may play a much larger role in how many men develop lasting attachment. The hormone is called vasopressin. Research suggests that vasopressin is strongly connected to bonding through cooperation, shared responsibility, and facing meaningful experiences together. Instead of creating connection simply through emotional conversations or physical intimacy alone, it becomes more active when two people work toward a common objective and successfully overcome challenges as a team. Looking back through human history helps explain why. For generations, survival depended on cooperation. Men often developed their strongest bonds while hunting, protecting their communities, solving difficult problems, and facing danger together. Trust grew because each person repeatedly demonstrated that they could depend on the other when it mattered most. Those shared victories strengthened emotional loyalty. Many avoidant men continue responding to relationships through a similar pattern. Emotional closeness grows less from someone simply expressing affection toward them, and more from repeatedly experiencing life alongside someone they trust. The distinction is subtle, but incredibly important. They are often affected more deeply by building something together than by simply sharing physical affection. When they begin associating you with teamwork, mutual support, problem-solving, and overcoming obstacles side by side, their brain starts placing you in a completely different emotional category. Instead of becoming only someone connected to pleasurable moments, you gradually become someone associated with safety, reliability, partnership, and shared purpose. For many avoidant men, that shift creates a far stronger foundation for lasting emotional attachment than intimacy alone ever could. One way to think about it is this: if your connection only activates his brain's reward system, your role in his life may resemble something he genuinely enjoys, but does not deeply attach to. He may return because the experience feels good, just as someone revisits a favorite place they enjoy. But enjoyment alone is very different from emotional investment. Real attachment forms when the relationship becomes associated with partnership, rather than pleasure alone. That is where vasopressin appears to play a much more significant role for many men. Instead of simply creating enjoyable experiences, it strengthens the feeling that someone belongs on the same side of life. You stop feeling like a pleasant distraction and begin feeling like the person he naturally wants beside him when facing challenges. When men describe these moments, their language is noticeably different from the way they talk about attraction alone. They rarely focus only on chemistry or excitement. Instead, they say things like, "It felt like we were working together," or "I knew she understood me without forcing anything." Others describe the experience as feeling supported, respected, or as though they had accomplished something meaningful together. Those descriptions reveal a completely different emotional process than temporary excitement. This distinction becomes incredibly important when you look at how many people approach intimacy. Many women instinctively express affection in the same way they personally experience love. They prioritize tenderness, emotional openness, long conversations, gentle physical affection, and romantic reassurance, because those behaviors naturally deepen their own sense of connection. An avoidant man, however, may experience those same behaviors very differently. If emotional intensity begins to feel overwhelming or creates pressure inside his nervous system, his protective instincts can activate before emotional bonding has the opportunity to develop. Instead of feeling safer, his brain may interpret increasing closeness as a signal that his independence is being threatened. The result is confusing for both people. One partner believes they are moving closer, while the other unconsciously begins creating emotional distance. Because of this, the quality of the interaction often matters more than the amount of affection being expressed. Moments that encourage cooperation, mutual understanding, shared confidence, and emotional safety are often more effective than simply increasing romantic intensity. When intimacy feels like something both partners are building together, instead of something happening to him, the experience becomes far easier for his nervous system to accept without activating defensive patterns. This is one reason Avoidance encourages people to focus less on trying to overwhelm an avoidant partner with affection, and more on creating experiences that reinforce trust, emotional safety, and genuine partnership. The goal is not to convince him to stay close. The goal is to create enough emotional security that closeness no longer feels dangerous. When that shift begins, something important changes inside the relationship. Instead of instinctively withdrawing after intimate moments, he gradually starts associating those experiences with comfort rather than emotional risk. Over time, your presence becomes connected with reliability instead of pressure, making it easier for him to remain emotionally engaged rather than instinctively pulling away. There is another fascinating layer to this process that neuroscience has been exploring. Researchers have observed that some avoidant individuals appear to experience what is sometimes described as stress-related disruption of attachment during emotionally intimate moments. In simple terms, their stress response can interfere with the brain's normal bonding process. This explains why some avoidant men seem noticeably different immediately after intimacy. You may notice him becoming unusually quiet, emotionally distant, or mentally preoccupied, even though only moments earlier everything felt warm and connected. To a partner, this sudden change can feel confusing or even painful, because it appears as though his feelings disappeared overnight. In many cases, that is not what is actually happening. Instead, his nervous system may have shifted into a protective state. When emotional closeness reaches a level that feels unfamiliar or vulnerable, cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, can become more active. As cortisol rises, it may reduce the emotional effects of other bonding processes, making it more difficult for him to remain fully connected in the moment. Picture a security alarm that has become overly sensitive. Even when no genuine danger exists, it continues reacting as though protection is necessary. That is similar to what happens in many avoidant nervous systems. The emotional connection is real, but internal defenses activate automatically because closeness has historically been associated with emotional pain, disappointment, or loss. While one partner experiences increasing attachment, the other may simultaneously experience increasing emotional overload. Without understanding this neurological pattern, many women naturally assume his withdrawal means he does not care, has lost interest, or regrets the relationship. Often, the reality is much more complicated. His brain may simply be responding to intimacy through an old protective system that developed long before the relationship ever began. Recognizing that difference does not excuse unhealthy behavior, but it does explain why emotional closeness can sometimes produce withdrawal instead of connection in an avoidant partner. Once you recognize how stress can interrupt the bonding process in an avoidant nervous system, many behaviors that once felt confusing begin to make far more sense. His reactions after intimacy no longer appear random or contradictory. Instead, they start to follow a pattern. The timing of his withdrawal, the shift in his mood, the sudden need for space, or the feeling that he has emotionally disappeared despite sharing a meaningful moment, can all become easier to understand when viewed through the lens of a stress-based attachment response. Learning to recognize these patterns is valuable because it helps separate emotional protection from emotional rejection. While every individual is different and no single explanation applies to everyone, understanding how a highly defensive nervous system can respond to vulnerability often removes much of the confusion that partners experience. If you would like a deeper explanation of this stress-related attachment process and the behavioral signs that often accompany it, let Avoidants know in the comments by writing cortisol disruption. We will explore the current psychological theories, explain why this pattern develops, and discuss how it may influence an avoidant partner before, during, and after emotionally intimate moments. Another important shift happens when intimacy stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like a shared experience. The strongest connections often develop when both people participate equally, rather than one person trying to create the perfect romantic moment while the other simply receives it. Think about the difference between watching a film together and completing a cooperative challenge together. When you watch a movie, the experience unfolds in front of you. You enjoy it, but neither of you is actively shaping what happens. In contrast, a shared activity requires communication, cooperation, and mutual involvement. Every decision is made together, and every small success belongs to both people. Many avoidant men respond more positively to this second type of experience. When intimacy feels collaborative rather than one-sided, it naturally creates a stronger sense of partnership. Instead of feeling like they are expected to perform or meet invisible expectations, they begin experiencing closeness as something both people are building together. That shift can dramatically change the emotional atmosphere. Rather than quietly waiting for him to direct every moment, becoming curious, engaged, and involved often changes the energy completely. Introducing playfulness, exploring new ideas together, or approaching the experience with mutual curiosity creates a feeling that both partners are discovering something side by side. Simple statements can reinforce this sense of cooperation. You might suggest exploring something together, invite him to experiment with you, or express curiosity about discovering what feels meaningful for both of you. The exact words matter far less than the attitude behind them. The message is that neither person is carrying the experience alone. Both partners are participating equally. Over time, one pattern becomes increasingly clear. Avoidant men often become more emotionally engaged when they feel they are sharing an experience rather than simply providing one. Their attention shifts from trying to manage expectations toward enjoying genuine collaboration. One woman described a remarkable change in her relationship after she naturally adopted this mindset. Instead of hoping physical closeness would magically deepen emotional attachment, she became more interactive and playful. Rather than remaining passive, she would occasionally pause, smile, and suggest trying something different. Sometimes she became curious about what they both enjoyed most. Other times she invited him to help discover new ways of connecting. According to her, those small moments transformed the emotional tone of their relationship. He seemed more relaxed, laughed more often, and became noticeably more present because the experience no longer felt like something he had to navigate alone. It felt like something they were creating together. There is another detail that many people overlook completely. Communication during intimacy often carries far more emotional weight than conversations that happen afterward. Many people assume that the real bonding occurs while cuddling, reflecting on the experience, or expressing affection once everything is over. While those moments can certainly be meaningful, avoidant men often respond differently. For them, connection is frequently strengthened by feeling understood while the experience is actually unfolding. Imagine two people training together toward the same goal. Successful partners rarely wait until the workout is over before acknowledging each other. They communicate throughout the process. They encourage one another, check in, adjust together, and celebrate progress in real time. The same principle often applies to emotional closeness. Gentle communication during shared experiences can reinforce the feeling that both people are emotionally present, working together, and responding to one another moment by moment. Instead of postponing connection until afterward, the connection develops continuously throughout the experience itself. For many avoidant individuals, that ongoing sense of partnership can feel far more natural than intense emotional conversations that begin only after the vulnerable moment has already passed. After observing countless relationships over the years, one pattern appears again and again. The women who build the strongest emotional connection with avoidant men are rarely the ones trying to create the perfect romantic moment. Instead, they make intimacy feel relaxed, collaborative, and genuinely enjoyable. They are comfortable slowing things down, laughing together, asking simple questions, and treating the experience as something both people are creating, rather than something that has to unfold perfectly. Rather than worrying about saying the right thing, they naturally stay engaged. They might check in by asking how something feels, invite him to share what he enjoys, or suggest exploring something new together. Sometimes they simply smile, laugh, or react honestly in the moment. Those small interactions seem simple, but they have a powerful effect on the emotional atmosphere. Instead of becoming trapped in thoughts about expectations, performance, or whether he is doing everything correctly, his attention gradually shifts toward the shared experience itself. He becomes more emotionally present. More importantly, he begins experiencing the moment as something the two of you are building together, instead of feeling responsible for carrying it alone. That subtle change often creates a completely different emotional response. Many people assume intimacy should always be quiet, perfectly choreographed, and uninterrupted. Because of that belief, they become afraid to speak, ask questions, or introduce moments of playfulness, worrying they might break the mood or reveal uncertainty. Ironically, that silence can sometimes make an avoidant partner retreat further into his own thoughts. Gentle interruptions, whether through curiosity, humor, or natural conversation, can actually help anchor his attention in the present. They interrupt the internal dialogue that often fuels emotional distancing and invite him back into genuine connection. Instead of analyzing himself, he begins participating with you. That shift from self-monitoring to shared presence is often where meaningful emotional closeness begins to grow. But understanding how an avoidant man develops attachment through intimacy is only the beginning of the journey. Many people assume that once emotional walls come down, the difficult part of the relationship is over. In reality, that is often where an entirely new chapter begins. As trust grows, something else changes. An avoidant man who feels emotionally safe often becomes far more authentic than he was before. The carefully managed version of himself slowly gives way to the person beneath the protective habits. With that openness comes a level of honesty that many partners have never experienced. He may begin sharing fears he has hidden for years, explain the reasons behind behaviors that once seemed impossible to understand, or reveal internal conflicts he rarely allows anyone else to see. Those conversations can be eye-opening. They often expose aspects of male psychology that many people never fully consider: how some men process vulnerability, why they sometimes withdraw despite genuine feelings, what fears influence their decisions, and how emotional protection can quietly shape the way they behave inside relationships. Many women believe that learning how to create emotional attachment is the final piece of the puzzle. In reality, attachment simply opens the door to deeper understanding. Once someone trusts you enough to stop hiding behind emotional defenses, you begin meeting the person beneath the protective patterns. That version of him may be more loving, but it is also more honest, more vulnerable, and sometimes more complicated than expected. Some of those truths are comforting. Others may challenge assumptions that have existed for years. Understanding them requires patience, emotional maturity, and a willingness to see relationships with greater depth than popular advice often encourages. That is exactly what we will explore next. In the next video, Avoidanza will uncover 5 difficult truths about male psychology that many women never hear until they have already experienced confusion or heartbreak. These are not designed to create fear or mistrust. Instead, they offer a clearer understanding of the emotional realities that often remain unspoken inside relationships. Some of these insights may challenge what you currently believe. Others may finally explain experiences that never seem to make sense. If you are ready to understand men beyond the surface and build relationships on awareness instead of assumptions, continue to the next video on your screen. The perspectives you're about to discover may completely change the way you interpret attraction, emotional distance, trust, and lasting connection.